The business world responds to Russia's war in Ukraine. Hi there, I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English, where we help you upgrade your English with current events and trending topics. Our full library of lessons, including this one, is available online at plainenglish.com. This lesson is at plainenglish.com/451. From retail to oil, shipping to technology, companies across a wide variety of industries are cutting Russia off. These are voluntary measures that go above and beyond the financial sanctions imposed by governments. On today's lesson, we'll talk about some of the companies that have pulled out of Russia, and we'll speculate on why they've done so. In the second half of the lesson, I'll show you how to use the English expression, take it upon yourself. And we have a song of the week. Let's get started. On Monday, you heard that Western countries, ranging from the European Union to the United States to Switzerland to Japan, launched a coordinated effort to cut Russia's economy off from the world. Financial sanctions punish banks and other companies and prevent them from doing business with prohibited entities in the sanctioned countries. Those sanctions targeted Russian banks, oligarchs, and infrastructure like airlines and pipelines. Legally speaking, though, most companies are still free to operate in Russia and sell their wares to ordinary Russian consumers as long as they don't do business with banks or specially sanctioned individuals. But businesses around the world have taken it upon themselves to stop doing business in Russia anyway, in protest against Russia's invasion of and war against Ukraine. This is adding up to a second wave of sanctions, call it voluntary sanctions, against the Russian economy. And it's these voluntary measures that will hit ordinary Russians. Let's start with some of the big announcements. You can't talk about Russian business without talking energy. Several of the world's energy giants have decided to divest of their assets in Russia. BP, a British company, Shell, a Dutch one, and ExxonMobil, an American one, have all agreed to sell their Russian investments. Total is a French conglomerate known for its willingness to work in unsavory places. Total has not yet decided to divest of its assets in Russia, but it has paused new investment there, and it's under increasing pressure to divest. In the financial world, major investors have pledged to sell their Russian stocks. Norway's sovereign wealth fund said it would sell all its Russian shares. Admittedly, not a large percentage. But other large pots of capital are following Norges Bank's lead, selling Russian equities. The Russian stock market fell 33% in one day after the war started. That was the fifth worst stock market plunge in world history. Russia's government closed the exchange so stocks couldn't trade. A Russian economist went on TV and drank a shot of vodka to toast the death of the stock market. There will be more long-term negative effects on Russian companies. Start in the boardroom. Many Western directors have resigned from Russian company boards. Russian companies often recruit foreigners to serve on their boards of directors. By having Western directors, Russian companies are more attractive to foreign investors. Without them now, Russian companies will be further isolated from the world. The Big Four accounting firms audit the world's biggest companies. An audit from one of these firms is often required for companies to attract investors. All four decided to sever ties with their Russian offices. Now, for payments. MasterCard and Visa are the payment processors behind the vast majority of online consumer payments. They're not banks, but they handle the payment processing for banks that issue credit cards. They were required to stop working with Russian banks on the sanctions list, but they appeared to be stopping all payments in Russia altogether. PayPal is another popular payment option that avoids banks and therefore is not covered by sanctions. But PayPal voluntarily stopped processing payments in Russia on March 5th. Apple and Google Pay were also suspended for some users. Discover, a smaller credit card network, was going to enter the Russian market, but they called that off. Now, in Russia, the simple act of paying for something online will be a lot more difficult. Consumer firms are also shutting down their business in Russia. Apple and Samsung, the world's two biggest smartphone manufacturers, said they would stop selling all products in Russia. Airbnb is suspending operations in Russia and Belarus. Nike, Adidas, IKEA, Zara, and H&M all pledged to close stores. IKEA had 15,000 workers in the country. McDonald's and Starbucks both said they would suspend operations. Shell, the oil company, will close its service stations in Russia. EA, the video game maker, said it would stop sales of games and in-app purchases to Russia. They've also pulled Russian and Belarusian teams from their sports games. Several tech firms said they would block Russian government mouthpieces RT and Sputnik. Apple and Roku will pull them from their app stores. Facebook and DirecTV said they would block access to RT and Sputnik. Spotify, newly attuned to content moderation, said it pulled RT and Sputnik propaganda from its platform. Twitter will downplay Russian news sources. Netflix operates in Russia, but the Russian government required it to carry state television on its platform. Netflix announced it would not be complying with that rule, and it also backed out of 4 content deals for Russian projects. Disney said it would stop releasing films in Russia. Warner Brothers followed with a similar announcement. Heavy industry is being affected too. Ford makes cars in Russia as part of a joint venture with a local company. The American automaker said it would suspend all manufacturing activity in Russia. Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, both headquartered in Germany, said they too would suspend manufacturing in Russia and halt exports. Boeing and Airbus, the aviation giants, said they would stop supporting Russian airlines. This means Russian airlines won't have access to parts, maintenance, and support services. Intel, the global chip maker, said it would stop sending products to Russia and Belarus. Microsoft and Dell are doing the same. SAP and Oracle make enterprise software, the kind of software the largest companies use to manage their finances and operations. Both SAP and Oracle have stopped product sales and have limited existing service to Russian clients. IBM, a large software and services company, also suspended work in Russia. Maersk and MSC, 2 global shipping giants, have decided not to accept new cargo from Russia. And finally, culture. Russian ballet performances have been canceled across the UK, and the International Chess Federation canceled a competition in Moscow. FIFA, the governing body of soccer, and the International Olympic Committee have historically demonstrated a remarkable moral flexibility with respect to Russia and other human rights abusers if the price was right. But this was too much even for them. FIFA banned Russia from the 2022 World Cup and moved a qualifying match out of St. Petersburg. The IOC will not allow Russian athletes to compete in the Paralympic Games in Beijing this month. So why are companies doing this? I think there are a few reasons. First, some companies might not be subject to sanctions, but they don't want to get anywhere near a sanctioned entity. So Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and PayPal are probably going above and beyond what the sanctions require, just out of an abundance of caution. Shipping, too, is tied up with the financial system. Cargo ships need letters of credit from banks, deposits, and insurance policies, all things that might not technically be subject to sanctions, but shipping companies don't want to take the risk. Nobody wants to be too close to someone that might be sanctioned. It also takes a few weeks for a container ship to sail from its origin to its destination. And during those weeks, all the rules could change. The second reason, I think, is that the consumer is getting more of a voice. And global consumers, at least for now, are all in agreement on the right thing to do. There were 17 IKEA stores in Russia. They said 15,000 employees would be affected by their shutdown. That's not a small number for them, but if you set that against the consumer backlash that IKEA would face in every other country, then it was probably an easy decision. So we can be cynical about business decisions, but I do think there is a genuine moral component to these decisions too. This is a global world now, and company bosses know people in Ukraine. Maybe they've been to Kiev, and now the whole world order. Yes, it's imperfect, but the whole world order has given peace and prosperity to so many people for so long, and it is being shattered. And company leaders are doing what they can to not be part of the problem. The question, though, is this: will this just make the Russian people miserable while the government and the military stay the course? This has never been done before. Russia has the 11th biggest economy in the world, and the effects of this are going to be felt in slow motion. We won't know for several weeks what this is going to do to the Russian economy and whether it will have any effect on the people dropping bombs on Kyiv. Today's English expression is take it upon yourself. We use this phrase when we're describing that someone has done something of their own initiative. That means nobody else forced them to do it, and it's not their responsibility, but they do it anyway. So we put this phrase right before an infinitive verb. Companies around the world are taking it upon themselves to shut down their operations in Russia. You learned earlier this week that governments have put financial sanctions on Russian banks and businesses. But those sanctions by themselves didn't say that Nike, for example, couldn't operate stores in Russia. Nike could keep selling sneakers in Moscow if it wanted to, but it doesn't want to. Nike and other companies are taking it upon themselves to stop doing business in Russia. They aren't being forced by the government to do that, but they're doing it anyway. In lesson 431, you learned that many companies are taking it upon themselves to provide counseling and other mental health services to their employees. In the US, it's generally expected that companies provide health insurance, paid vacation, and access to a retirement savings account. This is pretty basic for large employers with salaried workers. But many companies have taken it upon themselves to also provide special mental health counseling, wellness apps, and other benefits. It's not their responsibility, and it's not even expected, but many companies are doing it anyway. They're taking it upon themselves. Now, it doesn't mean that they're doing it out of the goodness of their corporate hearts. They may be doing it just to gain an advantage in the tight labor market. Regardless, though, they're not required to do it. So we say that they're taking it upon themselves to provide these benefits. I'm technically supposed to paste the quote of the week into a database that JR and I use to manage the website and the content at Plain English. I often forget. I remembered this week, but I often forget. Now, JR is such a good producer. He takes it upon himself to open the transcript, copy the quote, and paste it into the Airtable database. It's not his job. It's not his responsibility. It's mine. But he does it when I forget. And I don't thank him enough for doing it. So thank you, JR. Thank you for taking it upon yourself to copy the quote to where it belongs so that it can get on social media in those frequent times when I forget. Well, if your kids ever take it upon themselves to do extra household chores, you might want to say a special thank you or encourage them to keep doing these voluntary things. In my condo building, we're all adults, but we still have to share chores, specifically shoveling the walkways after a snowstorm. In December and January, I took it upon myself to get out there early in the morning and do a lot of shoveling. I wasn't required to do that. I did much more than my fair share in those 2 months. But I took it upon myself to shovel a lot in December and January because I knew I was going to be away for the whole month of February. JR saw his first ever musical lately. It was called Hairspray. I've seen a few musicals. There are a couple that I like, but I have to say it's not my favorite form of performance art. JR, though, really liked Hairspray, and for today's Song of the Week, JR chose his favorite song from that musical. It is You Can't Stop the Beat. And I believe the artist credit goes to 3 people, Laura Bell Bundy, Matthew Morrison, and Linda Hart. By the way, last week's question of the week for Plain English Plus members was about musicals. So every week, JR creates a discussion prompt for Plus members, and last week he asked if we like musicals. I had to answer that I do not, but there are a few exceptions. I do like one called In the Heights, which I saw a few years ago. I'm not sure, but I think that was recently a movie too. Well, that's all for today. I need to possibly ask for your forgiveness in the coming weeks if the lessons don't always keep up with the latest news from Ukraine. Things change quickly, but I have to start creating these lessons 2 to 2.5 weeks in advance. So I'm trying to keep these lessons general enough so that they're not obsolete by the time you hear them. I read my email and I know that you probably want to hear more about what's going on, but just be patient. We'll get to it all as the weeks unfold here at Plain English. Well, we'll be back on Monday with a new lesson. See you then.